Right, I'm going to be talking today about Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize winning novel from 1985, Lonesome Dove. I read this first back in, I think it was 2003, if my memory serves correctly. Um, and I had a really great copy of the book with the yellow cover and everything, but I loaned it to somebody and never got it back. So I'm not a fan of the cover of this book. This book is really generic looking. Excuse me, gotta drink my coffee. But let me just read the back cover, kind of spin off of there, I guess, because I don't have anything scripted out. So it says a love story, an adventure, and an epic of the frontier. Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize winning classic, Lonesome Dove, the third book in the Lonesome Dove tetralogy. Now let me stop right there. This is the third in a series, but let's be real. This is the first book that was published. Larry McMurtry published a sequel to this called Streets of Laredo, which I have read. And then he published two prequel novels, Dead Man's Walk and Comanche Moon, after that. And I absolutely think you should read these books in publishing date order. Okay? This book functions perfectly fine as a standalone, and many people consider it that. The likability of the other novels in the series is debatable. But let's just say none of the other books won a Pulitzer Prize. This book did. This book came first, and this book stands head and shoulders above the other books in the tetralogy. So this says here, it's the grandest novel ever written about the last defiant wilderness of America. Journey to the dusty little town of Lonesome Dove and meet an unforgettable assortment of heroes and outlaws, whores and ladies, Indians and settlers. Richly authentic, beautifully written, always dramatic. Lonesome Dove is a book to make us laugh, weep, dream, and remember. So it's a pretty good little synopsis, but doesn't really tell you a lot about what the main plot of the story is, because there's a lot of side tangents that spin off from this thing. But this book is essentially about a cattle drive of these two retired Texas Rangers, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow F. Call. They've been retired for about 10 years from rangering, and they're living in this town called Lonesome Dove, and they decide they're going to drive 2,000 head of cattle from Texas up into Montana. Why are they going to do this? Well, essentially because they're bored. Talk about these two characters real quick. They are kind of the yin and the yang to each other. Now, Gus, he is very much an extrovert person that is very hedonistic. He likes to drink. He likes his prostitutes, and he's very vain. He's kind of a talker. He talks a lot, right? His mouth never stops. He talks just to hear himself talk. Whereas his partner here, Woodrow Call, is very quiet, very introspective. He doesn't talk a lot. He tends to be cynical, have a cynical view on life. He's the kind of more the glass is half empty type of person, whereas Gus is the glass is half full. So they really are kind of like the opposite of each other, but at the heart of the thing that binds them together, or the thing they have in common, is that they both crave for adventure. And so here they are sitting on their their ranch in Lonesome Dove, and in Gus's case, he's literally sitting because he's a loafer. He doesn't like to work. He likes to sit on the porch, drink, and watch his pigs, whereas Cole is very driven and very motivated to do something. He's got to be doing something all the time. He has to have a job to do so that he can feel some sort of sense of accomplishment or duty or work. I've known many people like that in my life, but these two characters they complete each other in a way. They need each other because they kind of complete what the other person is lacking. So you could kind of see that that the two of them together form kind of this complete, well-rounded individual. Whereas when they're separate, all right, they're kind of they make up for what the other person is lacking. That's what I'm saying. Both of them are really made better and worse by their relationship with each other. So they tend to bring out the best in each other, but they also can bring out the worst in each other as well. Now, I had some very profound things to say about this sign that they build, or that Gus makes, and it's a humorous sign. They spend a lot of time on this sign talking about it. But it's got this Latin phrase on it. It says some funny stuff. It's the Hat Creek Cattle Company and Livery Emporium, and there's a lot made out about this sign. But there's a Latin phrase that says uva uvum viviendo veria fit. It's Latin. I was going to say something about this, but I can't even get a straight answer on what the Latin means. Okay, I've looked it up. I can't confirm this. Larry McMurtry said something along the lines of it means that when a grape sees another grape, it changes color, or it ripens. But I've heard other people say that it means something else. So most likely, as far as I'm concerned, it just means that Gus doesn't know Latin. I mean, because I'm getting conflicting translations on what the Latin actually means, so I can't really comment on it. I had some really deep thoughts that I thought, oh, this will be good. Like, I'll talk about this. But I've come to think maybe there is no deeper meaning to the Latin on here. It just means that Gus doesn't really know Latin because he screws it up. It's just kind of a humorous thing. There's a lot of talk about this sign. Now, it takes about 200 pages in this book for this cattle drive to actually get going. They're in Lonesome Dove. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of similar to the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, where we spend a lot of time in the Shire before we ever get out on our adventure with Frodo. And this book has a lot of similarities to Lord of the Rings. It's kind of like this epic journey with a fellowship, okay? And it ends up sprouting on into a lot of side adventures and whatnot. But the whole thing that really kicks it off is Jake Spoon, which is an ex-Texas Ranger that worked with Gus and Cole back in the rangering days, and he shows up and he talks about Montana. It kind of puts into Woodrow's mind to go on a cattle drive up to Montana to be the first people up there. And later in the book, Gus kind of calls him out on it and says, you didn't really want to go up to Montana to the cattle. You know, this was never about cattle, right? What this was really about was, let me see if I can find the passage for you. Well, I didn't have any luck in finding it. I had all these passages marked out, okay, and then I lost all my markings. You know, it's a long story. I won't go into it. But let me read this one excerpt from the novel, the kind of where I talk about these guys being morally gray and being prone to fits of violence, okay? That these are muddy characters. And this is like a rated R book, by the way. All right, let me just say that up front. There is a lot of sexually explicit material in here. This isn't like Marshall Dillon and Miss Kitty in Gunsmoke, okay? You're not just going to have the mention of prostitution, but there's actually we get scenes where they're engaged in the act quite often in this. So if that's going to upset you, maybe don't read the book, or maybe get over it. I don't know. It's a great book, but I will say, whereas the television series is PG, this is rated R. All right. But this scene that appears also, this scene appears in the miniseries as well, when they're in San Antonio. This is very early on in the cattle drive. So Augustus walks in to this saloon, and he's looking for his friend Willie. And Willie's the bartender. He says when he strode in, there was no sign of Willie or anyone they recognized. A young bartender with slick hair and his string tie gave them a look when they stepped to the bar, but seemed as if he could scarcely be troubled to serve them. He was wiping out glasses with a little white towel and setting each one carefully on a shelf. The saloon was mostly empty, just a few card players at the table in the back. Augustus was not one to stand patiently and be ignored by a bartender. "I'd like a shot of whiskey, so would my companion, if it ain't too much trouble," he said. The bartender didn't look around until he had finished polishing the glass he had in his hand. "I guess it ain't, old-timer," he said. "Rye, or what will it be?" "Rye will do, provided it gets here quick," Augustus said, straining to be polite. The young bartender didn't alter his pace, but he did provide 2 glasses and walked slowly back to get a bottle of whiskey. "You darn cowboys ought to broom yourselves off before you walk in here," he said with an insolent look. "We can get all the sand we need without the customers bringing it to us. That'll be $2. Augustus pitched a $10 gold piece on the bar, and as the young man took it, suddenly reached out, grabbed his head, and smashed his face into the bar before the young man could ever react. Then he quickly drew his big Colt. When the bartender raised his head, his broken nose gushing blood onto his white shirt front, he found himself looking right into the bar of a very big gun. "Besides the liquor, I think we'll require a little respect," he said. "I'm Captain McRae, and this is Captain Call. If you care to turn around, you can see our pictures when we was younger. Among the things we don't put up with is dawdling service. I'm surprised Willie would hire a surly young idler like you." The card players were watching the proceedings with interest, but the young bartender was too surprised, having suddenly had his nose broken, to say anything at all. He held his towel to his nose, which was still pouring blood. Augustus calmly walked around the bar, got the picture he referred to, which was propped up by the mirror with 3 or 4 others of the same vintage. He laid the picture on the bar, took the glass the young bartender had just polished, slinging it lazily into the air, back in the general direction of the card players, and then the roar of the big Colt filled the saloon. Call glanced around in time to see the glass shatter. Augustus had always been a wonderful pistol shot. It was a pleasure to see he still was. All the card players scurried for cover except the fat man in a big hat. Looking more closely, Call remembered him. His name was Ned Tim, and he was the second seasoned gambler, too seasoned to be disturbed by a little flying glass. When it stopped flying, Ned Tim coolly took off his hat and blew the glass from the brim. "Well, the Texas Rangers is back in town," he said. "Hello, Gus. Next time I see a circus, I'll ask them if I need a trick shot." "Why, Ned, is that you?" Augustus said. "My old eyes are failing. If I'd recognized you, I'd shot your hat off and saved the glass. Where do you keep your extra aces these days?" Before Ned Tim could answer, a man in a black coat came running down the stairs at the back of the saloon. He wasn't much older than a bartender. "Where's going on here, Ned?" the man asked, prudently stopping by the card table. Augustus still held the big pistol in his hand. "Oh, nothing, John," Ned said. "Captain McRae and Captain Call happened in. Captain McRae gave us a little demonstration with his pistol, that's all." "It ain't all," the bartender said in a loud voice. "That old son of a bitch broke my nose." With a movement so graceful it seemed almost gentle, Augustus reached across the bar, rapped the bartender above the ear with his gun barrel. A tap was enough. The bartender slid out of sight and was seen no more. So we have this explosive act of violence right here. And I'm not going to read the rest of the dialogue, but it's clear that Call and McCrae, like I said, have a little bit of vigilante in them, okay? And there is a very interesting dilemma that these two cowboys have, Gus and Call, is that they have civilized Texas, right? So because of their fighting Comanches and Apache and Mexican banditos and outlaws down in Texas, they were good at their job, and essentially because they were good at their job, they have civilized Texas, and therefore they no longer feel like living there. These are two guys that don't really fit in to society. These are guys that don't like to take orders. These are guys that like to live their own way. There is an interesting passage at the end of this chapter where they get to talking about Texas, about the Alamo, and about what it means to be remembered. Why nobody in San Antonio remembers them is simple. It's because they didn't die, at least in Gus's mind. So he says, well, Call, I guess they forgot us like they forgot the Alamo, Augustus said. Why wouldn't they? Call asked. We ain't been around. That ain't the reason. The reason is we didn't die, Augustus said. Now Travis lost his fight. He'd get into the history books when someone writes up this place. 1,000 Comanches had cornered us in some gully and wiped us out like the Sioux just done Custer. They'd write songs about us for 100 years. Struck Call as a foolish remark. I doubt there ever was 1,000 Comanches in one bunch, he said. If there had been, they would have taken Washington, D.C. The more Augustus thought about the insults they'd been offered in the bar, a bar where once they had been hailed as heroes, the more it bothered him. I ought to give that young pup from Mobile a rap or two, he said. He's just scared, Call said. I'm sure Toby will lecture him next time he sees him. It ain't the pint, Wildrow, Augustus said. You never do get the pint. Well, what was it, darn it? Call asked. We'll be the Indians if we last another 20 years, Augustus said. The way this place is settling up, it'll be nothing but churches and dry goods stores before you know it. Next thing you know, they'll have to round up us old rowdies and stick us on a reservation to keep us from scaring the ladies. I'd say that's unlikely, Call said. It's darn likely, Augustus said. If I can find a squaw I like, I'm apt to marry her. Thing is, if I'm going to be treated like an Indian, I might as well act like one. I think we spent our best years fighting on the wrong side. So, like I said, these are guys that are relics. They're quickly becoming relics. So, they are dudes that are one step away from being outlaws. And in fact, there's a passage in the book where Gus actually says that the reason why he didn't stay in Tennessee, being raised from a wealthy family, is because all that was in Tennessee was doctors and lawyers, and he'd rather be an outlaw than to be a doctor and a lawyer. So if you've seen Sam Peckinpah's movie, The Wild Bunch, I think a lot of the themes of these two Texas Rangers kind of paralleled the guys in that movie. Although those guys were definitely on the dark side. They were straight up outlaws, robbing banks and whatnot. But the themes are very similar. It's about a life that no longer exists for these dudes. They're trying to hold on to the Wild West, and it's quickly becoming tame in their minds. So they go up to Montana on this grand adventure to try to see one last bit of land that is unsettled and wild. And I'm guessing that the book is taking place right around 1876 sometime, because he says and mentions in the passages I just read that Custer just recently was killed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So that happened in the summer, June of 1876, at the centennial of our nation. So book setting has to be sometime in 1876 or 77. It's very recent to current events. Um, Let me talk a bit now about the miniseries. The miniseries, okay, was directed by Simon Windsor, an Australian director who directed such films as Quigley Down Under, which is another Western starring Tom Selleck. He directed Free Willy. He also directed a film starring Don Johnson and Mickey Rourke called Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. All three of those, I think all of those movies have a score by Basil Palladores. Now, Basil Palladores won an Emmy for his score for Lonesome Dove. I will say that this is a very faithful adaptation of the book. Although it is kind of condensed, the book is much longer. There's a lot more going on in the book that got cut from the television adaptation simply because it's such a long novel. But this came out in 1989. It was 4 parts, and it was, I think, the highest rated television miniseries of all time. Stars Robert Duvall as Gus McCrae, and Tommy Lee Jones as Woodrow F. Call. You also have Diane Lane as Lori, who is the prostitute from Lonesome Dove, and then you have Angelica Houston as Clara, which is the love interest of Gus. D.B. Sweeney's in this as Dish Boggett. Ricky Schroeder as Newt. You have Danny Glover as Joshua Dietz, which is one of my favorite characters. Chris Cooper plays July Johnson, kind of the dim-witted sheriff from Arkansas that's trailing Jake Spoon, who's played by Robert Urich. But it's a very fantastic miniseries. Like I said, this is kind of the PG version. This is family friendly. You can watch this with your family, and you're not going to get all the explicit stuff that happens, whereas it's described in the novel. All right, when Blue Duck gets to murdering people, it tells you how he does it. Okay, and it's not pretty, folks. It involves scalping and mutilation of genitalia, and you're not going to hear that described or see that in the film. So you can watch the movie with your family, and there may be a few things that are kind of racy for your kids, but you could. I think a 13-year-old kid could watch this fine. Now, I don't think you're going to want your 13-year-old reading the book, but hey, whatever. This is definitely rated R. I'm not going to go on forever about this. I just want to say that this is a fantastic novel, and I could talk about it probably for an hour, but I'm not going to, because I'm already, where am I at here? 23 minutes, and I feel like I barely scratched the surface of this thing. But this may be the greatest Western novel of all time. It may be. It's a 5-star novel. The only other novel that I've read in the Western genre that I feel was as well-rounded characters. These characters feel fully alive and fully realized characters. Even the women, okay? That's one thing I'll say about it, is the women feel like real-life characters. Larry McMurtry says if you're going to read, or the USA Today said if you're going to read one Western novel in your life, read Lonesome Dove. And I think I could probably agree with that. Although I would say I really like True Grit as well. So I think if I had like my top Westerns of all time, True Grit is going to be standing right with Lonesome Dove at the top of that list. Although I think Woe to Live On by Daniel Woodrell is probably going to be up there too in my top 5 westerns. But as far as top novels, like books in general, I don't think True Grit or Woe to Live On are going to be in my top 10 list. They as far as like westerns or of novels of all time are concerned, it's going to be other things like Lord of the Rings and um, Dune by Frank Herbert, probably going to be in the top 5, top 10. But if you're just talking about westerns, okay, like this is not just going to be in the top 10 books of all time in the western genre. This is going to be in the top 10 books all time, period, cross genre, whether it's mystery, murder, horror, westerns, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever. So do yourself a favor if you've never read it and read it. And then watch the miniseries, because the miniseries is fantastic. So, yeah, that's really, I think, where I'm going to wrap things up. So thank you for watching. And I think I'm going to finish reading the Dune series by Frank Herbert. So I got to read Heretics of Dune and Chapter House. So I think I'm going to dust those off, and then I'll see what I read after that. But those will be upcoming in the near future. So have a wonderful day.